Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you details of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about the issue of free power or subsidized electricity. Now, ongoing assembly elections in 5 states have seen a flurry of promises from political parties, and the prominent one amongst these is the promise of free or subsidized power for farmers and domestic consumers. Uttar Pradesh has 5 state discoms, and amongst them Paschimanchal Vidyut Vitran Nigam and Dakshinanchal Vidyut Vitran Nigam have the highest share of agri-consumers at close to 20%. In Punjab, agri-linked consumers account for approximately 24% of total consumers. According to analysis, free power to farmers account for 70% of total subsidies. Free power to scheduled caste, backward caste and BPL families contribute around 14%, while subsidized power to industrial consumers constitute at least 16% of the total subsidies on power. Now, experts point out that free power not only erodes the financial viability of the electricity distribution sector, but also leads to industrial and commercial consumers paying cross-subsidy in terms of higher power tariffs to partly compensate the under-recoveries discoms suffer on account of providing power at cheaper rates to domestic and agriculture consumers. In today's episode, we will try and understand as well as analyze all aspects of this issue. And for more on this, we're joined by a very distinguished panel. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Mr. Vipul Tuli is joining us. He is the chair of Power Committee at FICCI and Managing Director of Sembcorp Energy India Limited. We also have with us Mr. Sanjeev N. Sahai, former Secretary in the Ministry of Power, and Dr. Pramod Dev is also joining us, former Chairperson of the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission. Welcome, all of you gentlemen, to Sansad Television. I'll begin with a very simple question for our viewers to understand first. What is it that actually we're talking about and where is the problem? And I'll start with you, Mr. Sanjeev Sahai. Let's start by making our viewers understand how does this concept of free power or subsidized power actually works on the ground?
Free power is generally given to broadly in the agriculture sector, and in some states it's also to the domestic consumers as in Delhi. But so essentially what is done is that in many states there is a limit. So if you consume, say in Delhi, up to 200 or 400 units a month, there is no charge to the consumer. In agriculture, normally where it is subsidized or it is free power, there's no limit. Some states do put limits to the number of units a farmer or an agriculturist can consume. Some states have absolutely no limit.
Okay.
So what happens is that the entire cost of electricity, the purchase price of power, the cost of distribution, the cost of collection, all that is borne supposedly by the state government. And the state government is supposed to reimburse the discoms. Given the financial status of the state governments, many state governments either defer the payment, delay the payment, or are actually unable to pay the discoms, and the discoms then run into cash losses.
Okay.
It then impairs the ability to pay the generators. The generators depend on revenues from the discoms, and the discoms' inability to pay also leads to load shedding. So there's a whole nexus of interconnected reasons that leads to a very suboptimal outcome because of free or subsidized power.
Okay. So basically, there is a ripple effect which is set in motion, and then it becomes a vicious cycle, as you're pointing out, which keeps on, going on and on. Mr. Tuli, from the industry's perspective as well, from the viewpoint, if we have to understand, how does it impact? Because as Mr. Sahai was also referring to, many experts over the period of time have pointed out that this puts a very serious dent in the financial viability of the overall power distribution sector.
No, of course it does. I think it does affect industry. It affects competitiveness of the country and of the state in question. And of course, it also unfortunately affects the rural consumers the most in the end. And we can talk about all of those three. If you look at it, as Mr. Sahai rightly said, the primary mechanism that gets used to make up the gap, if you're giving free power to let's say, to agriculture, the primary mechanism that's used is either subsidy, which is promised by the states, or higher industrial tariffs. You also mentioned. Now, typically the subsidies are delayed or they don't come. Usually, especially when fuel prices go up, those subsidies are insufficient. And in general, the amounts of subsidies that are set are not enough to cover the investments required by these discoms or by the transmission companies. They are just enough to make them just about work. Now, if the discoms are starved for cash, first of all, network quality becomes worse, outages, repair time, etc., etc. Service suffers, especially to the rural consumers. So development of rural areas suffer. We actually go to a situation where rural areas get rationed power rather than get provided power.
Okay.
And the cost of providing that power by the discom also goes up, because obviously if a discom is unviable, their cost of borrowing will go up. We've had many cases where even state guaranteed borrowings for discoms have gone at rates higher than commercial market rates. So it increases the cost of electricity. And then, of course, the biggest issue from a generator's point of view is they don't pay the generators on time. Now, if the generator doesn't get paid, by the way, today the generators have about 1.4 lakh crores of outstandings on a national basis. You can check up these numbers on the Prapti portal. They're very transparent. Now, if the generator doesn't get paid to this extent, what happens? His cost goes up. So he has to borrow more expensive money. He has to charge for late payment, which he charges the discom. His credit rating goes down, and therefore again he has to pay more for borrowing. And of course, some have even just gone straight bankrupt.
Okay.
Many of the generators are not able to afford to keep sufficient fuel inventories. Therefore, if you saw the big, power price run up that happened last October, this was one of the reasons, because the generators don't have enough cash to be able to stock up on inventory. So whenever demand goes up a little bit, there's a crisis. Maintenance suffers. But most importantly, new capacity investment in generation, which
that takes a backseat.
So critically needs if we are to grow over the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years and ensure jobs for all our people. That new capacity investment suffers. Look at the actual returns that generators have made. If I take all the listed private companies in the power sector, the average return for those is only 5% return on equity.
Okay.
The PSUs make about 11%. The private sector makes about minus 5%. The average comes to about 5%. Now at 5%, you or I will not invest our money anywhere. So, but we are expecting these companies to keep investing and driving the national economy.
Okay.
Second point that actually happens, which is quite important, is industrial tariffs become much higher, as you also rightly said. They have to be high to cross-subsidize free power. Now, what this does is it makes the state and more importantly, the country uncompetitive. I'll give you an example. Typically, our large or powerhouse states, they are typically at about 8 to 10 rupees per unit of electricity tariff. Okay? Compared to that, let's see some other countries we compete with economically in the market. China is at about 6 rupees. Vietnam is at about 5.5 rupees. By the way, Vietnam is actually charging its domestic higher than they're charging their industry. So these countries are giving their industries competitiveness to be able to export, to be able to compete, to be able to give jobs, etc.
Okay, those are very pertinent points, Mr. Tuli, and I'd like to bring in Dr. Dev here as well. Dr. Dev, you've been at the helm of affairs at CERC, and now the question which we need to understand is, as Mr. Tuli was pointing out, various aspects. It seems a very complex issue. How serious is the problem when we are looking at the trouble caused by the subsidized power for the entire power distribution sector?
I think to explain this, I would take Gujarat, because Gujarat has been shown to be a model. But how the distorted tariff structure and the political exigencies are making the whole economy of the power sector unviable. Because if you see, like in Gujarat, the average cost of supply is ₹5.90. This is the 2021. Now you have only 19,000 very large industrial consumers, they contribute 50% revenue. If we were to take 1 megawatt and above, they come to something like 58,000 or 60,000. They are contributing 56% revenue. That means against the average cost of supply of 5 rupee 89 paisa, they are paying 7 rupees 30 paisa.
Mhm.
And all the remaining consumers obviously are paying only 44%. But most important is that if you take agriculture is 18 lakh pump sets. So they are being given the tariff of 3 rupee 42 paisa
Okay.
as against the average cost of 5 rupee 89 paisa. Now, why I'm taking Gujarat? Because Gujarat, this subsidy for agriculture
Mhm.
is paid upfront. So that's not a problem. But the difficulty comes is that this 3 rupee 42 paisa, which has to be paid by the agriculturist, if it is not paid by the agriculturist in time, what happens in the balance sheet, which is done on an accrual basis, this is shown as if this revenue has accrued to the discoms.
Okay.
And if this money doesn't really exist in power. In Maharashtra, you have got a similar case. It is not that the Maharashtra government is not paying, because earlier Mr. Sahai referred to the cases where they don't pay. But I deliberately taken these two examples where all this money is paid. But if we were to see Maharashtra, there are something like more than 30,000 crore money which has not come from agriculture, which was the money which is something which it has been agreed to be paid agriculturists.
Okay.
But unfortunately, the balance sheet, which is done on an accrual basis, it shows that this money has come to discom and the tariff will be determined on that basis. So if we were to remove the industrial and this agriculture, the remaining consumers, which mostly would be the domestic consumers,
Mhm.
they are paying more or less 100% the cost of supply. There may
Okay.
be a subsidy given to small consumers, but that consumer subsidy is taken care by the large domestic consumers and the residential consumers.
Okay.
So this is extremely detrimental to the health of the discom, because the discom's problem comes in, they don't have real money.
Mhm.
Even if you see the balance sheet, till this money is written off, which is a long process, then only this money would appear.
Okay.
So this being the case, it's always easy for the politicians at the time of the election. They want to treat electricity as a merit good, and they will declare, we are not giving free power. Now, if you were to give free power, another thing is there's a metering of agriculture. That itself is an issue. So again, why I've taken Gujarat and Maharashtra, those are the states where they are done 100% separation of agriculture figures.
Okay.
So the whole idea was that you would know how much electricity is
Has been
supplied to
consumed by that
agriculture.
particular section.
And in other states, this work is still in progress.
Okay.
But even after that, Maharashtra is a very good example where again the statistics was fudged. And then it was a committee appointed by MERC where the Prayas took initiative. And what they found that discom claimed that their distribution losses have been brought down to 15%.
Okay.
But in reality, when the study was done, they found that the agriculture supply has been inflated because many of the feeders which have a separate supply for agriculture, those meters are not working. And this has been done deliberately because there can't be any other reason for that. So the result is the actual supply of agriculture, as the committee determined, which MERC accepted, was only less than what it was claimed. And the result was that the losses, what we call as AT&C losses, aggregate technical commercial losses, which is a euphemism for the theft of electricity and also the actual technical losses. They were not 15% as claimed. They came to 21% plus.
Okay. So there are of course, both sides of the story there as well, and those are very good examples you pointed out, Dr. Dev. But Mr. Sahai, as you were also earlier referring to, and Dr. Dev also pointed out, political expediency apart, and the electoral politics apart. One thing which we need to understand here is, of course, there will always be a section of consumers which will have to be, subsidized in terms of be it agriculture or farmers or perhaps, the smaller consumers, those below the poverty line as well. But the bigger question is how to strike that balance, how to, resolve this issue, because this seems a sort of a vicious cycle as you were earlier referring to.
So let's start first with the proposition, do consumers need to be subsidized?
Okay.
This question. The subsidy on diesel, etc., has come down significantly. And let's accept for a moment the argument that agriculture and small consumers, let us just accept that argument, require subsidy or require access to electricity. Why can't it be done in form of DBT, which says that I will give you a certain amount of money.
Okay.
Now the choice is yours to consume how much electricity you want. Happens when you give free electricity or cheap electricity, it leads to overconsumption, over irrigation. The cropping pattern, which is not suitable for certain areas, that become viable. For example, rice, etc., are now grown extensively in Punjab, Haryana, etc., which was not agroclimatically suited for rice.
Okay.
But it is because of pure free power or cheap power, which allows for exploiting the groundwater resources, which has also stressed the quality of soil. So free or cheap power leads to overconsumption, spoiling the quality of land, and actually works against many people, as Vipul Tuli pointed out. The effect that the quality power 24/7 is not only impeded, but there's also a question. If I am poor, I will not be able to consume my entire 200 units. It is, certain sections which are able to do that. So I would advocate that if the political dispensation thinks that people need to consume electricity up to a certain point, then it is the choice of the consumer, the amount of electricity.
Okay. Okay, and that seemingly is a very, very interesting and important suggestion there coming in from Mr. Sahai. Mr. Tuli, would you agree with this aspect? We will have to find ways and means to tackle the challenges, and one of them, as suggested by Mr. Sahai, is why not go for DBT mode of transferring subsidies, that is direct benefit transfer. That resolves a lot of financial issues between the state governments and the discoms as well, which then ultimately lead to a lot of additional problems.
I think DBT is a good solution. In fact, if you rewind back about 5-7 years, there were many questions about DBT. But the fact is that wherever it has been tried by and large successfully. Now, the power sector is also a fairly well-regulated sector. Consumers are reasonably well known, and the systems are fairly professional once the administrative and political will behind that to implement is there. So DBT, I think, is a very good thing. I think the main purpose of DBT is that you are providing the subsidy to wherever you think in your political wisdom that subsidy is needed. Then you can say, I want to, as he's saying, you can give it for a limited number of units, you can put it in increasing slabs and all that. All that is absolutely fine. But fundamentally, you are insulating the industry from industry, meaning discom, transmission company, generation company, fuel supply. You're insulating all of them. Let that operate as a fully efficient, competitive industry that can really do the best for the consumers and do the best for the country.
Okay.
I think one thing that sometimes we forget is that, Vishal, if you look at the demographics of India, 60% of people are one way or the other dependent on agriculture. Now, if we are increasing the cost of industrial tariffs or industrial electricity, that increases the cost of all goods. no goods are made without electricity today in some form or shape.
Indeed.
All goods prices go up. Who is paying those prices? Population of India is paying. 60% of that population is the farmers. So whether we like it or not, the farmers are paying for that electricity. It's just that they're not paying it in electricity bills. They are paying it in every other form.
Okay.
So I think once this reality is understood, we can start to move to a much more transparent, much clearer system. And I think DBT is an excellent system. I think what Mr. Deo mentioned around separation of the meters, the agricultural meters and non-agricultural is also an excellent practice. I think many states are adopting it. It should just be rolled out as fast as possible. And I think the third thing I would say is, this whole solarization of pumps is also a good idea, provided the long-term maintenance and operation of those, etc., can be sustainably ensured. I think these three things can make quite a big dent. But it has to start with the realization that ultimately the farmers are paying for it one way or the other. Might as well make it explicit and improve their service quality, improve their
and put in place an efficient system for it to work as well, as Mr. Sahai was referring to. Dr. Dev, do you agree with this concept of routing the subsidies through the DBT part 1? And of course, metering is one issue which you earlier raised and that Mr. Tuli also seems to be agreeing to. But in terms of, finding an effective mechanism to give benefits to those who deserve it, and in turn, in the process, not sabotaging or not harming the system, the overall, power generation or the discoms.
Well, to give you very concrete example, why DBT has been opposed by discom MSEDCL in Maharashtra. The reason is, as I told you, that 3.70 rupees is the tariff fixed by MERC. Rest of the money is being paid by government and it is being paid in full.
Okay.
But this 3.71 rupees is not paid by many agriculturists. And they are not all the small agriculturists. They are the ones who grow cash crops, sugarcane, vineyards, bananas. So the result is, today, nearly 20,000 crore are the outstanding. This money has not been recovered by MSEDCL. So that being the case, if we were to give this money to farmers, he's not going to pass on this money to MSEDCL. So MSEDCL says, at least I'm getting this money from the government, that subsidy which is being given. I would not even get that. So please don't give it to the farmer directly. Let it be adjusted. Now, one solution would be you just give free power to farmer. So the entire burden of giving electricity with the cost of it will be paid to discom by the state government. Well, that is the solution, but it has got a huge cost because Maharashtra has got only 43 lakh agriculture pump sets.
Okay.
So if we were to take the consumption, it's going to be huge. But then that may be a better solution. At least you will get the money in the discoms coffer.
Okay.
Otherwise, this money doesn't exist.
Okay.
So this is the real problem with direct benefit transfer.
Okay.
It can work very well for small residential consumers because there is no difficulty there.
Okay.
This is the thing.
Okay.
And solarization of pump sets, why it is a good idea? Because then in that case, what will happen? You will be delinking from the MSEDCL supply.
Okay.
But the difficulty is that since you have 100% electrification in states like Gujarat, Maharashtra, you already have those lines. You have separated feeders. So you will have again a political challenge that farmers will say, you are giving us now solar power, which is very good because we need electricity during daytime.
Okay.
And earlier, supply is only for 8 hours by rotation.
Those aspects will be there, Dr. Dev, and the suggestions which all three of you are making seemingly might end up being the solutions to the current problem which we have. We're running short of time, but I'd like to thank all three of you, Dr. Dev, Mr. Sanjeev Sahai and Mr. Vipul Tuli as well, for sharing your views and insight with us and our viewers. There it is, as our experts were pointing out. the entire concept of free power or subsidized electricity to a certain section of consumers, be it farmers or domestic consumers as well. There, in fact, is a cost to this free power as well. And the industry, that is the power sector, is feeling the pinch out there. The need of the hour is to find innovative solutions, some of them being mentioned by our panelists. We'll keep a close watch on this aspect and come back again with a different topic. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.